Welcome back to Is Anything Real in Paid Advertising, the podcast where we separate signal from sludge and ask the uncomfortable question, is your ad budget fuel or is it fertilizer? Here's today's hot take. Most ads don't fail because the creative sucks. They fail because the homework never got done. Joining me is Nikhil Vaish, agency veteran working on brands like IBM, Unilever, Citigroup, and startups galore. Now helping solo business owners stop wasting money on campaigns that were doomed before launch. Nikhil, welcome to the show.
Hi, Adam. Excited to be here and looking forward to our conversation.
Awesome. You've been in the trenches, big budgets at global brands, small budgets at startups. What would you say the common thread is in what doesn't work?
Well, I think the size of the budget doesn't matter as much as sort of doing your homework, right? So a lot of people sort of have bad things to say about marketing and advertising, and and fair enough. So, but the problem is not that your ad is not working, but the mechanics within it is what people don't spend time on, right? So essentially there are three or four parts to the process, right? So most people kind of have a good idea of what they want to do, what they want to say. So they may have an offer, they may have an expertise. So that part is step one. Think of it that way.
Yep.
What then happens is people go to step three, and that's when they start marketing. They start talking about selling. They start talking about, and they start looking for systems, lead generation, etc. And all of that is important, and it comes, but not at the expense of step two, right? And that's really sort of in a short summary is what I would say is that's where the homework gets done. And we can get into that a little more, but that's the step most people miss. And I think I call it sort of building the foundation to make sure your marketing, your advertising, your lead generation works.
Right. And I know both of us admit we rarely click ads ourselves, yet we've managed millions in spend across both of our plates. Why do you think businesses still treat paid as gospel?
Well, I think so two reasons, right? One is that we sort of shifted. So when I started in advertising, and you call me a veteran, I've got the gray hair, so I can date myself quite happily. We didn't have metrics. We didn't have the ability to measure everything, right? So there was largely brand advertising because that's kind of and to be fair, it worked, right? We had results, we had campaigns. And then once digital came into the picture, which is a good thing, we got the ability to measure. And I think what happened was, as tends to happen, with very little measurement, we suddenly went to too much measurement, right? So everything sort of shifted to the other end of the pendulum, if you like. The pendulum swung the other way, rather. And everything needed to be measured. And I think that's where people looked at sort of like paid advertising. I need to get a return on investment on every dollar that I spend. Otherwise, that dollar is being wasted. And I think, and I don't think the answer is one or the other. I think you need both. I think you need brand and performance. But if you lean too heavily on one or the other, you're going to leave you're doing half the work rather than, creating the full picture for people who want to buy. And the other thing I will add is I've never clicked on an ad either. But that's not to say advertising doesn't work, because I have seen ads that have influenced my thought process, right? And you have to think of it as planting seeds. People are not robots. It's not like you get up in the morning and say, I want to buy a car. You see an ad and you're like, that's it. I'm going to go buy the car today.
Right.
But
right. I mean, it's incredible. Like when we think about, the trackability of things as well. But like if we move up to the modern day and where we are, right now, I know you've also said AI is making the noise worse, right? Because there is a lot of noise, whether you talk about brand. We used to call in paid search, of course, brand and non-brand support. We would budget separately for those. But, this AI slop, let's call it, that we're in the midst of these days, what do you mean by that? And why should founders be worried?
So let's go back to the fundamentals again, right, for a second. So I think what's happened is step one is you have your offer. Step two is where you do the homework, and I'll talk about that in 1 second. Step three is execution. Now, what happens is everybody tends to jump from step one to step three. They immediately start executing. And what the danger with AI is that it's made that step a lot easier. It's almost like you put in something and you can create slop, as you call it.
Yep.
But the issue is still the same, right? And so step two is really understanding what problem you're solving, and it should be one problem. understanding who your audience is, and it should be a niche audience, very specifically. And the third thing is then figuring out what you do differently, right? So that step 2 to me is the foundation to make step 3 work. So step 3 will almost always fail. And I think the danger with AI is, again, it's like, and the way people are using it now, and there was a report yesterday from both Anthropic and GPT released a study on usage of AI. So there are two very interesting things in that, is that personal usage is going up far faster than business usage. So people are actually having, therapy conversations. Again, that's a different podcast maybe. But the second thing was people were looking less for outputs and more for information. So they're using it as a search tool, right? So I think that's, the trend is sort of going that way. But also what happens is you're just plugging things into AI and getting your outputs. So it can now build websites. It can now create ads. It can create videos. So again, when you don't have that second step, you've enabled step 3 with even less, thoughtfulness and research than we perhaps had before. And that's my fear.
So, and I love how you break that down into those 3 key questions, right? To answer, what's the one problem you solve? And then needing to get into the one that gets skipped. Who exactly are you solving it for? And then how do you do it differently? Why do you think solo operators really trip up there, just like big brands do? Do you think is it there a fear of going too niche? I've also talked with some people about how you niche and then you have to niche sideways, which is a different kind of concept of niching. But where do solo operators trip? Do they just imagine that they get from step 1 to step 3 immediately with no work? Or is it something different?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, I don't know if I have the answer, but I think what I've noticed.
It's digital marketing. None of us have the answer, right?
Fair enough. I think there are a couple of things that I've noticed, right? One is there is this belief that you need to go out and execute quickly, right? And because the belief is that if you're just sitting around, you're doing step 2, people see that as time wasted and you're not earning money, right? So step 3, there's a lot of social pressure to go out and execute and sort of like, to get, because even if you look at the people, who are selling solutions out there that I'm competing with, they will all talk about a new system, a CRM system, a lead generation system. Everything is executionally driven, right? So there's so much pressure out there to basically say that the answer sits in step 3. And the reason, and yet every client who's come to me, and this is not, I'm not making this up, has told me that their step 3 is not working, and everything that they've tried, everything that they've bought, and people have spent a lot of money going to courses, putting in new systems, to enable step 3, which is, logically also you would say, okay, I've got to go and execute for people to see and for people to react and for people to, come to me as clients or potentially become clients. But again, when that fails, people are sitting there quizzically wondering why it's not working. And then, of course, advertising, paid advertising gets a bad rep. Now, I'm not saying everything should be paid advertising. Same is true of organic advertising, right? Same is true of word of mouth. If you're not clear on, who your audience is, what problem you're solving, the specific pain point and how you solve it differently, all your marketing, all your communication is going to struggle because it's like a gaping hole, right? And again, I'll just give you one analogy. It's like building a house without a blueprint. You will end up with doors, windows, but none of them will be in the right place. You will not be able to move around and live in that home comfortably because you never built that foundation before you went off and started, putting everything together. So I think that's the issue.
I mean, I think that's what it comes down to. Solo operators think in that mindset of they're always looking for the silver bullet.
Yeah.
And it's funny. I've actually, I don't know how many people go back and do the research into the history of where the term silver bullet comes from, but there has never been a silver bullet that's been created in the world. It's a falsified entity. And I think that's fascinating because we all look for that shortcut and we don't think about the methodology that needs to come in, the dedication that needs to come in to focus to really deliver what we're looking to deliver in the world. I'm sure I don't want to break any NDAs with any clients, but do you have any really either powerful stories from clients you've worked with who totally transformed their marketing ROI, Or on the flip side, do you have some crash and burn stories where people didn't do it right that you could weave in here?
Yeah, so I'll tell you one example without naming any names or
Sure.
getting sued here. Um, of a client who had been in business for a long time and suddenly hit a plateau, right? So
Mhm.
when we started working together, his thought was, again, it feels logical that the more people you go and target, the better off you'll be, because it's
Right.
like, it's like reach out to more people and you'll get some hits, right? It's like
Right.
that's kind of the way people think. And yet when we work together, the first thing I told him is you need to start cutting down. You need to
Yep.
start narrowing your audience. It's not more clients that you need, it's less clients, which
Yep.
sounds completely counterintuitive. And that's what we work together to do. I help them sharpen the tip of the spear, as I call it, right? And
Right.
we really narrowed down his audience down to a specific person that he was able to now describe and get into their head. And suddenly everything started clicking. Within a few months of working together and finishing the brand boost, which is my program, he
Yep.
was closing deals. He said, 8 out of 10 chemistry calls used to be horrible before, and now it's flipped the other way. He was closing 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10
Wow.
versus losing time and energy on talking
Mm.
to so many people. And that's the other thing people don't realize, right? Is when you go after a broad audience, it's going to suck your energy. It's going to lower your confidence because you're
Right.
not going to be succeeding. You're not going to be closing. And that is hard as a solo entrepreneur, right? Now,
Right.
on the flip side, larger brands have that luxury. Like IBM can have 10 different audiences because they've got budgets that support being able to go after each of those audiences separately, right? But
Right.
solopreneurs don't have that luxury. We don't
Right.
have the time, we don't have the energy, we don't have the bandwidth, and we certainly don't have the money to invest in multiple audiences. And the
Right.
other brilliant thing about going narrow that people don't recognize is you can actually charge more.
Right.
You know,
If you dig into that corner, you can charge more.
exactly.
Exactly.
Think about it. If you have a problem, if your knee hurts, Adam, you're not going to go to a dentist just because it happens to be nearby and he's got some medical understanding, right?
Right.
You're going to go to somebody who
Right.
specializes in knee surgery, right?
Right.
You have to think of it the same way. You're going to go to people want a specialist to solve their problem. They don't
Right.
want a generalist.
Right. And I mean, I like to think about it. If you want a taco, you're not going to go to an Italian restaurant, right? That's another way to think about it.
Let's
So
hope
let's pull it back from your experience. Say a founder walks in, maybe they don't have $5,000 cash even sitting around, but they have the appetite to put $5,000 onto a credit card and incur a little bit of debt to build the brand. Why is skipping ads and doubling down on clarity sometimes the smarter move with those kinds of dollars that are really hard to let go of?
Well, again, it goes back to the step 2, right? That's what we were, because it's think of it as investing in the foundation of your business long term, right? So again, the allure of short term results is very high. And the other thing I will add here is social media is another bad influence and pressure point for people, right? Because
Right.
it's full of stories of overnight success.
Right.
Everyone talking about how in 24 hours they went, they quit their job. A week later, they were lying on a beach and the money was rolling in. And of course,
Mhm.
none of that is true. So I think that's part of the problem. So there is this, I get it. People are, there's so much pressure. If you're saying you're spending $5,000, you're putting it on a credit card, then, the first question my spouse would ask me or my partner would ask me is like, what are we getting for that money? And if you say, okay, we're getting clarity and we're getting foundation, that just does not sound, viable or sexy when you're putting, when you're making an investment.
It's an intangible. It's a moving thing. It can be interpreted in so many different colors and apertures.
Right. And so, so it is important to have tangible outputs attached to it, right? And that's one thing, honestly, I've sort of also learned through this process is while you need all of that, people need to also see the light at the end of the tunnel, right? That's not just enough to do. So I think it's a combination of helping them understand you can do all the things you want to do. But I will add your organic starts working a lot better too. Your work, your networking calls are clearer. Like you go to a networking session, like you mentioned, if you can be very clear about your pitch and who you're talking to, you're going to get much more traction than if you're just sort of winging it or trying to, if you're unfocused in terms of what problem you're solving or who you're trying to talk to. So I think that is fundamentally why it's worth doing, and you will see it takes a little longer, but I don't know anything that is worth doing that is quick and easy, right? Honestly. So
I mean, it's like I guess I must be hungry in this conversation, because I'm thinking, like, how many times have I quick turned a corner for my kids and made a grilled cheese in the microwave?
yeah.
And how does that suffer compared to a grilled cheese that you melt butter in a pan, you take it slow and low, and then you flip it and it's golden and crispy, right? It's different. It's a different way to approach it. And it's that garbage in, garbage out mentality as well. And I have to say, you know, painting a picture mentally, thinking about 2026, you know, what do you think keeps happening if the solopreneurs, because I think the data does show solopreneurship is continuing to grow, if solopreneurs keep ignoring those pre-marketing areas and just dump money into ads, where does this world go of entrepreneurs?
You know, in a way, it's not a bad thing, because I think human beings have to experience, you know, we have to experience it ourselves before we sort of before the light switch goes off, right? So again, in the last few months, I've been talking to a lot of potential clients and prospects, and just sort of, you know, understanding what their issues have been. And literally everyone has come to me after being burned by investing in something that was going to get them quick results. So I think if that accelerates, and AI is accelerating that, people will get to that realization faster, I think, which means less money spent, less pain, less time sort of stumbling, and realizing that, you know, the foundation is really important if you want to build something sustainable, long-term, and that provides value to people. And so I think, you know, I have an optimist lens, and maybe I'm completely wrong. You know,
we're cut from the same cloth there, that like that next good thing is right around the corner, which is probably it's an Achilles heel sometimes, but it ultimately is the thing that allows us to keep going.
Yeah, and I think AI gets us there faster if you think about it, right? Because you can vibe code a website. Literally, I was talking to somebody last week who spent 2 hours and built a magnificent website with, you know, not massive deep features, but enough to sort of get you going. And again, testing and learning is not a bad thing either, right? Now, again, the other thing I will say is when you're starting out, you have to have a hypothesis. You're not going to know the exact answer. And, you know, in 6 months, you will evolve, but you need that to be out there with some level of focus. Again, you can't be just throwing the kitchen sink. And then in 6 months, you'll have real world data that will inform you and help you sharpen that focus, right? So as I had a guest a couple of weeks ago on my podcast, it was brilliant. And the way she put it was, you know, why would you be vanilla when you could be Zanzibar chocolate, right? Everybody's vanilla. Everybody's competing for vanilla. And that's the other problem that you talked about. When you talk about noise, when you're unfocused, you're competing with everybody. And I always say, you want to become a category of one. That's what focus does. Is, you know, when you combine your story, your lived experience, and that becomes your why for helping people, nobody can copy that. Because Adam's why is going to be completely different from Nikhil's why and everybody else's, right?
Goes so back to our origin story of what delivered us to where we are today, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Awesome.
So,
Nikhil, this was like a rocket ship, right? We went from corporate budgets to solo scrappiness to AI sludge without missing a beat. Where can folks find more about what you're building with BoostSolo and your work there?
I have a podcast on YouTube called Unfiltered Solopreneur, and we spotlight solopreneur stories, but there are lots of tips and actionable things you'll get from amazing guests that I've had on the show. And Adam, you're one of them. Your episode will be out in a few weeks. Cool. And then BoostSolo.com, you can find more information about our programs, and then LinkedIn.
Awesome. And then Nikhil, for the solopreneurs listening, coaches, consultants, freelancers, what's the one move they should make this week before their marketing, to make their marketing finally work?
So one trick I will tell you to use, which I people don't use. So they're sitting there, and I'm not going to call it a trick. I'm going to call it a piece of intelligence, right?
Yes.
So everyone does sales calls. What I tell people to do is record your sales calls. Now, obviously, anonymize it, get permission before you do it. Then run it through GPT, not asking it to summarize, but ask it to pull out the exact phrases your prospects used in terms of describing their problem, their pain
Ooh.
points, and what they were looking for help with, right?
Yeah.
Now turn that into your messaging. You've got ready-made copy that is basically clients will look at it and say, how did you get inside my head? Right?
Yep.
Because you're not making up copywriting here. You're basically taking it from the source and playing it back to the exact people who have those problems and are looking for those solutions. So that is the one thing I would tell them to go do, is take those transcripts, anonymize it, and then, use it as messaging.
That is incredibly powerful to take away from today, Nikhil. Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to Is Anything Real in Paid Advertising, the podcast where we challenge what works and torch what doesn't. I'm Adam W. Barney. And one last thing, if you haven't done the homework, stop blaming the teacher. Ads won't save you. Let's get clear and then let's get real. But Nikhil, thanks for joining today.
Thank you for having me, Adam. That was a lot of fun.
Scaling fast, but who's flying the rocket? If you're a VC-backed founder, 7 to 8 figure operator, or executive team scaling fast but heading toward burnout, I help you rebuild your energy system, reclaim 10 to 20 hours a week, and lead with clarity, stamina, and execution energy. 2 seats open now. DM me recalibration or go to adamwbarney.com to lock in a clarity call. Clarity over chaos